Welcome back to Grandpa and the Millennial. I'm Natasha. I am the millennial, and I'm here with Anthony. He is the grandpa.
Hello, everybody.
So our podcast is all about hearing and highlighting people's stories. And today we will actually be hearing your story, Anthony. More specifically, a part of your story that relates to a very serious topic and something that's extremely personal to you. So before we get into any of that, I did want to say thank you for sharing it with us. I can't imagine that it's easy for you.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Natasha. My focus really is to help people. And if sharing my story and what's happened to me can help even one individual, then it's worth sharing it and having the conversation. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I think it will. So some of our listeners may know and others may not, but you were involved in a high school shooting when you were 15. And you recently decided to share details of that event on as a guest on another podcast. So what we'd like to do in today's episode is actually share the episode that you were on. But before we do that, I hope you don't mind if I ask you a couple questions.
Yeah, please do.
So first, how many people have heard this story? And even the ones that have heard it, how many have heard it in this detail?
Yeah, so I would say there was quite a big audience when it originally happened a little over 30 years ago. But those that have heard it in detail probably count on one hand, which is going to be very close family. And then, those that may have been, witness to the event, they may have told their version of the story. But I haven't shared from my standpoint and my version with very many people at all.
Yeah, there was definitely some details that I hadn't heard. So I'm sure there will be just expanded for those that have heard. So what has it been like over the last couple weeks? I mean, sharing your story after so long, it's been about 32 years. So what's it like sharing or talking about it now?
Yeah, it's an uncomfortable topic. I'm at ease with telling the story, but it's uncomfortable to share it with so many different people. But I think it's time. And like I said before, if I'm able to help one person or many people, or if there's questions or anything that I can do to help somebody, I think it's important to continue the conversation.
Absolutely. Well, my last question was going to be, why is it important to share it now or share it in general? But you kind of touched on that. Before we play the episode, is there anything else that you wanted to say to anybody listening or anything else to add?
Yeah, the only thing I'll add that I don't think I touched on in the episode is I don't have a solution to this issue of school shootings or mass shootings. Again, my purpose is really for those that have been through this event or they're close to somebody who has. If there's anything that I can do to help, you can reach out to me on any one of our platforms. We're fairly easy to find. But again, that's the main purpose and the main driver. So sit back and listen, and I'll walk you through that day.
Well, again, thank you for sharing. So we'll go ahead and we'll play. The episode is from a podcast called Multispecitve, and it is also, that episode is live on that platform as well, but we will go ahead and play it here. And like Anthony said, reach out to him or us if there's anything that we can do.
Today, we feature an episode that interviews Anthony Lopez on his jarring experience at a high school shooting. In October 1989, when Anthony was a mere teenager, he was confronted by a deeply disturbed student that held the class hostage for over 30 minutes and eventually led to him being shot. He recounts in detail what he remembers of the grueling day and the post-shootout trauma and recovery of him and his peers. Anthony, welcome to Multispecitve.
Thank you, Jennica. I'm really excited that you have me on today.
So, Anthony, your story itself is something that's really interesting. It's something that I think here in Asia, people maybe don't know or talk about too much because it's not, maybe probably a bit of a non-issue here. But, ultimately your childhood, you've had a very, very severe incident that occurred when you were younger. And, we'll go a little bit into that. But before we get into the story, I'm just curious, can you just tell us a little bit about, yourself growing up? What was your childhood like? Where were you raised?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born and raised in Anaheim, California, and I had a fantastic childhood. So I had my stepfather who raised me. My father wasn't around. My stepfather was my dad. My mom was there. I have a brother and a sister, and then I have a couple stepbrothers and a stepsister. So I had a full house throughout my childhood. My father was a police officer, which is interesting as we go into the story and some of the things that have happened. But I had a really good childhood. No complaints.
Yeah, big family as well.
Yeah.
What was that like, though, being raised in such a big family? Did you feel like you were still really close to your parents, your siblings?
Yeah, so I was the second in line, so the second oldest. So there was a lot of responsibility, but very close to my siblings, as well as my parents. I think, growing up in a larger family, you always have somebody to lean on, or always have someone, to play with when you're younger, and then someone to be involved with as you get older. And I still have a close relationship with the majority of the family as we've gotten older.
Oh, that's amazing. What's the neighborhood of Anaheim like? Is it a fairly safe neighborhood? Would you say it's conservative?
I'd say it's a fairly safe neighborhood. So we were right down the street from Disneyland, probably within 10 minutes. So that was a place, one, I went to as a child, and then I also worked there. But yeah, I would say it was a safe neighborhood. I think you have your typical challenges or opportunities with any larger city. And like I said, my father was a police officer. So that also added a dynamic of who I interacted with and the people who knew me and how they knew me. I was a police officer's child. So I felt very safe growing up.
Did you feel like, though, having a father that was a police officer in any way affected your relationship with friends or the way that others kind of interacted with you?
I think it did. I think the simple answer is yes. And I probably rebelled a little bit. My father, or a lot, when I got into my teens, which is one of the reasons why I was at the school that I was at. I went to probably 3 or 4 different high schools just because I got in and out of a little bit of trouble going through my high school years, especially after the incident. But yeah, my friends were obviously knew who my father was and that we wanted to stay out of trouble. They didn't want to engage with him. So yeah, I would say it changed the way the relationships were.
Is Anaheim generally quite I don't know, like an affluent neighborhood? Is it quite racially diverse and liberal?
It's very racially diverse. And I would say that you have, like any big city, you have the affluent areas. And if you go up, let's say up into the hills, so to speak, it's definitely more affluent than others. And then within that city, you're going to have the same social economic challenges that you have in any large city. So it just depends on where you're at. A very, very large city, Anaheim.
Right. What was the name of the school that you went to?
So I went to a couple of different high schools. So the one that I started off going to was Catella High School. The school where the incident happened was Lowera High School, and that was my sophomore year in high school.
Right. Did you feel like that school itself it had a really like good structure in place for, supporting students? Did it have like a counselor in school? Did it have pastoral care for students? Was it a safe place?
So I felt it was a safe place. So there was counselors there. I think that the teachers and the staff were outstanding. And as I go through the story, that there were some that had a large impact on my life. As I look back and understand some of what was going on in the background, my father was actually one of the police officers who was a school resource officer, and he had made a recommendation to the school on security and increasing the security. I think it was within 6 months of the incident that I had happened. So as I get into the story, that will become more clear, but I think that there would have been an opportunity for there to be more security. Also, my incident this happened 32 years ago. It just wasn't something that was very common and not expected.
Yeah, that's true. I'm wondering if this is like one of the first few incidents that sort of, I think I remember it hitting international news. Am I right in saying that?
So I do know that it was a major story at the time. Still have newspapers, and there was a lot of involvement. I don't know if it went international. I was so young and I haven't gone back and looked, but I would imagine it did. It was I didn't realize at the time how big of an incident it was, but looking back and then understanding over the years what's happened and what's been written about it, yeah, it ended up being a major story and one of the first.
So our listeners are probably really curious as to what this incident is.
Yeah.
Do you mind getting into it a little bit, telling us about what happened?
Yeah. So I'll start from the beginning of my day that day, and I'll bring everybody along on the journey of what happened. And so first, before I jump into that, I just want to say, the purpose of me doing this and being on your show is because there's an opportunity from my perspective of what's happened to me that I may be able to help other people. And what happened to me on that day, there was 30, 35 people that were involved, if not more, following the actual incident. And they saw a different version than what I saw. So it's been a long time. I have my memories that I believe are crisp and they're clear. But other people may have a different version. So in no way would I want to take anything away from somebody else who was there that day or think that I saw something different. This is just my recollection of what happened. So I was 10th grade. I was 15. I just turned 15 5 days before this. And it was October 5th of 1989. And way back then in 1989, school started in the middle of September. So I'd only been at this school for a few weeks. And I was trying out for the basketball team, so I knew a couple people in the classroom. They were on that team. I didn't have very many close relationships, if any at all. And I was in a drama classroom. So in that drama classroom, when you walked in, it was leveled. So there was 3 levels of seats that went up, and then there was a teacher's desk in the back. And in the front, there was a piano. And I believe there were 35 students in there that day, and then the teacher. And we were going over stage positioning that day, and where you're supposed to be staged, where you're supposed to be standing. It was one of the lessons from what I remember. And we were about 20 minutes into class, and there were 2 doors in the front right when you walked in, and then there were 2 doors in the back that led into the theater, and those 2 doors were typically locked. So I was sitting right in front of the front door, 2 rows back, and a young man came in. And he was wearing a red flannel shirt. I think he had a hat on, and he was carrying a shotgun, a 12-gauge shotgun, I believe, and then a very small 22 handgun. And so my father, who was a police officer, which I mentioned, I had seen at that time, weapons throughout my time, because my dad came home and he had guns, and they were much larger than the gun that was being brought in, the 22, and I'd never seen a shotgun before. So he came in and he told the teacher that the teacher needed to leave and asked him to leave. So the teacher was in the back of the classroom, and he stood up and he came down. He asked us all to stand up, and we did. And he pointed the gun at him and he said, "No, just you." And so the teacher asked us to sit down, and he walked out and the doors closed. So at that time, we started looking around, and he started saying, I'm not going to hurt anybody. I'm offered some people a sip of his drink. I can't remember maybe it was a soda or Coca-Cola. And he sat down at the piano, is what I remember, and put a shotgun on top of it. Now, in this room, when you started your day at the school, they had a speaker system at the top. So if the school wanted to talk to you, or if you wanted to do the Pledge of Allegiance, they needed to make an announcement. They could come through that intercom, and all of the students would be able to hear it in the classroom. So we had that in there, and it's important to the story because I remember thinking, as this went on, I'm not hearing any announcement. I'm not hearing anything that the school's locked down. So there's different ways that your mind starts to go through to assess what kind of situation you're in. So as time went on, we were talking, and I just didn't think this was real. I think there was a lot of us in that classroom that just thought this was part of the teacher's way of getting us involved in the drama room and in class, and this kid was coming in and stage presence and things of that nature. So there was conversation. I think people were asking him questions, and some of the memories get fuzzy as around to the details of what happened over, I think it was about 25 minutes that he was in the classroom. And so he had gone to the back of the classroom, and he sat in the teacher's desk, and he left his shotgun up front. And I went back, and we had some words, and I was challenging him. I was looking at the gun. I just didn't think that gun was real. And we had some words back and forth. I don't remember the specifics. I'm sure I said some things that I probably shouldn't have said. And ultimately said, if you want to find out if this gun is real, go down to the front of the classroom. something to that effect. So I said, okay. So I went down to the front of the classroom. So now I'm below him. He's above me because of the way the classroom was set up. And he pointed the gun at me and he fired it. And interestingly enough, the weekend before, I had gone out with some friends. It was the first time I'd ever been paintballing. It's a paintball gun. You go out, you load them up with these paintballs, and they shoot you. And got shot, and it stings and it hurts, and you pull yourself out and you get back in. So as soon as he shot me, I didn't feel the pain of what I would have thought happens when you got shot. I felt a sting. I felt very warm, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I've been shot with a paintball gun," and he split my lip open, and I could feel this warmth that was just going down my neck into my chest, and I didn't know what it was. And I started getting a little bit dizzy, so I started to walk up the stairs, and I knelt down in front of one of the only kids I knew, and I was like, "I think he shot me with a paintball gun." He's like, "No." He's like, you've been shot." And I was like, "What?" And he told that kid to move away, and he said, "Leave." And at this point, I'm starting to lose blood, and I'm confused, and people were screaming and people were crying. And I said, "What?" And everyone said, "Leave." So I got up and I turned around. And as I turned around, I saw that there was blood all over the door and there was blood on the floor. And I was trying to take it all in. And so I literally slid out the doors because my hands were covered in blood. And as I got out, there was police officers on the top of the school building. They all had machine guns and they were pointing at me. And they said, "Put your hands up." So I put my hands up. I was like, "I've been shot. I've been shot." And I froze. And to the right was the counselor's office. When you come into the school, that's where you would go to check kids in, check them out. And nobody was coming to me. I was standing there and they're like, come here, come here. And there's people at the door. And so I went over to that room, and, there were a couple women that started taking care of me. They started applying pressure to my face. They sat me down in one of the rooms, and it's a little bit foggy. I can't remember all of the details. It was very hectic. I do remember that within 2 to 3 minutes, I have all kinds of people around me. There's cops on me. They're asking me questions. How many people are there? What happened? How many weapons? All of the typical questions you would think. I still didn't understand what had happened, but he let all of the girls go after he shot me within 2 to 3 minutes. And they only had one place to funnel them, or they decided to funnel them through that room. And the first one that came in that saw me passed out. And at that point, I was like, okay, something is serious. There's all of these police officers, all these people. So they started to work on me, and they got all of the information. They got me into an ambulance. And at that point, all of the adrenaline and everything, started to go away. And I asked them, I said, "Am I going to die? Like, what's happened?" They said, "No, we're going to take care of you." They put a neck brace on me. They're working on me. Nobody's in the ambulance with me that I remember other than the actual ambulance personnel. So then I get to the hospital, and by the time all of this had happened, I think it had been about 35 to 40 minutes. I was in the classroom for about 25. By the time I got to the hospital, it must have been 35, 40, maybe 45 minutes. And there were reporters lined up just taking pictures as I came out of the ambulance, and they wheeled me in, and they cut my shirt off and they started working on me. And I don't remember how much time had elapsed, but at some point my parents came in, and I was happy to see them, told each other we loved each other, everything was good. And then from that point, there's a lot more that happened with life, but that was kind of the end of that incident.
Oh my gosh, that's so intense. And it's like from the very beginning of the whole situation to the end, even down to like the reporters at the end, clicking pictures. It's just like everything is happening at a pace that's so much faster than you can catch up to. And so you're in this situation where you're just trying to figure out what's going on and also match up to what everyone else around you is reacting to. And so it's just this weird, I can imagine you just being so confused, but scared at the same time, because you're like, is this happening to me? But yet I can't really register all of this all happening in front of me.
Yeah, absolutely. When you go back 32 years ago, before social media, before school shootings or mass shootings were something that were in the news on a regular basis, I had no idea what was happening. So trying to comprehend all of the different pieces without having any context. It was a sensory overload. And then your body's going into shock and everything that's happening to you physically. So yeah, there was a lot that was happening at that time.
Yeah. You mentioned that you didn't really exactly realize that you'd been shot for quite some time. You thought it was like a paintball gun, right?
Yeah.
When it did occur to you, when your friend mentioned to you, no, you have been shot, do you remember what were some of the thoughts going through your mind in that moment?
It's something that's very difficult to comprehend. So, and especially as a 15-year-old, it's easy, I'm 48 now. So it's easy when you're 15 years old or when you're 48 to look back and have perspective on it. I don't remember what I thought other than being scared and then trying to understand once I was in the ambulance and then once I was in the hospital and them telling me, the bullet, because of the angle that he was at, it went down through my jaw, it shattered my jaw, and then it stuck in my neck. So I had a bullet in my neck. They weren't able to take it out for about 30 days because it was so close to the jugular. So comprehending all of that as just a young youth, it's overwhelming. So those thoughts were very confusing and scary.
You said that it shattered your jaw and then it got lodged into your neck. What were some of the effects of that? So how many sort of surgeries do you have to have, like a jaw reconstructive surgery with your neck in terms of like eating, talking, breathing? How did it affect you?
Yeah, so I'm incredibly blessed that the bullet went in through my jaw. When I say it shattered it, it took a chunk out of it. So I had whatever it blew out of the hole, there was bone and there was bullet fragments. The bullet that went into my neck, they took it out about 30 days later. They had to let all of the swelling go down. So that was the only surgery that I had that was associated with it. It took me, I got shot on a Thursday and my father had me back at school on a Monday. And so it was a very, very quick turnaround time. The physical piece of what happened to me was by far the easiest compared to all of the mental challenges that I had that was associated with it, not understanding of going through a trauma at that particular time. The physical piece was certainly the easiest part.
Wow, yeah, that's in a way, really lucky because, there could have been so many ways that this could have gone, right? Especially because it was on your face and near your neck, near your back potentially. I mean, it could have been such a messy situation.
Yeah, like I said, I feel blessed. Obviously, he wasn't, pointing the gun to shoot me in the jaw, and the damage was minimal.
Do you know what happened after you had gotten out of the room, inside the room? What did he continue to do after that?
So my understanding is within just a couple of minutes, he let all of the women go, all of the girls. And then he stayed for another 15 to 20 minutes. I'm not sure who talked to him or how he got out. I would assume that everybody that saw what happened was incredibly scared. I know there was a small coat closet. There were some people hiding in that closet. Those that saw what happened, I didn't see myself get shot. They all saw me get shot. So they saw something. They have a different tragedy than I had or a different vantage point that I had. So I can only imagine what they were going through that was left in the room and then what they had to deal with once they all were let go.
Yeah, that's so scary. Looking back on it, has there ever been a part where you've thought about this and said, if only I didn't say what I said to him in that moment or express this doubt in him, the whole situation could have been very different. Have you ever felt any kind of regret over maybe verbalizing what you did?
I would say the simple answer is yes. So, when I think back to everybody that was involved, for the 30 plus individuals that had to watch me get shot, which is, a trauma for them. Yes, I absolutely regret that happened. Maybe he would have left without shooting anybody. And so maybe his life was impacted. And then the people that had to take care of me when I left that room, that were applying bandages and had to see that entire situation. Yeah, I wish it would have been different. But that's 30 years later. So the simple answer is yes.
Yeah, no, of course. It's sometimes like hindsight 2020, right? It just,
yeah,
when you're out of that situation, you look back and you're like, maybe that could have been handled differently. Especially knowing that, your dad is a police officer and there were guns around in your house. I would assume that maybe your dad had spent some time with you and your siblings talking you guys through, different certain scenarios, situations, what to do, how to keep safe in these situations.
There's definitely those conversations, but there wasn't conversations about a school shooting or a situation like that. It was just, I don't want to say it was unheard of, but it wasn't something that was top of mind like it is today. Today, those are conversations that I had with my children growing up, obviously because of my situation, but I'm not the only one. Schools have protocols for these situations, and this is talked about quite a bit, unfortunately. But back then, it just wasn't. So it was just all new.
I'm curious, what made the shooter decide to come into this drama class? Did he have any kind of connection with the teacher, with the students? Was there any connection with drama? Why this class?
Yeah, so I can only go off of what I've read and what I understand. So my understanding is that his family was moving from the city that we were living in, and they were moving 7 to 8 hours away, and that he had an issue with his stepfather, and he wanted his stepfather to come down to the classroom that day. And that's really what the day was about. So had I not said anything and intervened, maybe this goes a completely different way and we're all let go. But that was my understanding. And that, like I said, that's just from reading the different articles and that were available to us at the time.
Was he also like a student of the school? You said that he
was a student. I didn't know him, but he was a student at the school.
Wow. So it seems like he also came from somewhat of a complicated background. From the article as well that was posted, which I'll also put the link into the description, that he had expressed a couple of times to other students that he had this intention of getting back at his stepfather. And, he had all this anger towards his stepfather. And he'd mentioned a couple of times, I'm going to bring a gun into school and I'm going to hurt somebody. And I am so angry. And my stepfather needs to know about how much he's hurt me. Do you know much about that side of the story of his?
I do not. So I've never spoken with him, and I have access to the same information as everybody else does as far as articles and things of that nature. I didn't know the individuals that were quoted in those articles or have conversations, or at least I don't remember having conversations with them. So I don't know that history and what happened there.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Yeah, I'm fascinated by it just as much as everybody else is.
Yeah. What about in terms of like your feelings towards him after that incident? Even though you guys didn't have much of a relationship, you never really spoke to him, but how did you feel about him? Did you ever at any point wish to speak to him and ask him, or want to know more about why he did what he did? Did you ever feel anger towards him? I'm guessing maybe through the process of the therapy, there was also a lot of that going on, those kind of conversations with your therapist.
So I did go through therapy. I'll trust that. It wasn't for very long. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. I had to go through that. There's still, residual effects of that today. Is anytime I'm in whether it be a movie theater or if I'm sitting in a church, because of the construct and the memories that come up, it just creates anxiety of, a funneled way in and out. I don't remember having anger for him. I can tell you now, I don't hold any anger towards him now. I've dealt with what's happened and feel like I have a strong understanding of who I am and what happened to me that day. So there's no anger. He was a 15 or 14-year-old individual who made a terrible, terrible mistake that day. And just like I don't want to be defined by what I did or what happened to me at 15, I would hope that people don't define or hold him, accountable for what happened to him that day. And that, I don't want to be very clear that that's me and that's my situation. I understand that there's traumas and there's shootings and there's tragedies, and it's bigger than just somebody having a bad day and a mistake, and that people's lives are taken and affected. And that's different from this story. And I would never want to take away from someone who's lost somebody or is going through this, because it's very difficult to go through. It's just the way that I've been able to manage through it in forgiveness and understanding that that day wasn't about me. I just came across his path.
Right. How long did it take you to come to that point, though, of understanding that it wasn't about you? Because for a while, it must have felt like it was, that everyone around you, reaching out to you, media around you, the school, like your parents, everyone sort of in that time, because it happened to you, them making it about you. At what point did you let go of that, distance yourself and say, no, it's not about me. I don't take this personally. I don't take this person and what happened to me so close to me, I suppose.
Yeah, if I had to put a number on it, I'd probably say 10 to 15 years before I really matured in the way that I looked at the situation and understood it. I'm in a unique situation. It's not as unique as it used to be, but when you go through this particular tragedy or trauma with the amount of bright lights, and back then it was just newspapers and the way people engage with you, it was incredibly difficult. At 15 years old, you don't know how to handle that type of attention, and it's not all good attention. I was, bullied quite a bit. I didn't last very long at that school. I ended up leaving after 2 years. There were, as you read the story and the people that were in the room and the way things start to grow and people have different perspectives, there was some that were really upset for me for what I did and how I did it and wanted nothing to do with me. And I can't say that I blame them. Like I said, they saw a certain incident and then people were their friends. And then there was a certain group of people that, they wanted to be around me because I was getting attention and everybody knew who I was, and those weren't, true relationships. So I'm not looking for pity for anything that I went through, but it's a very real dynamic for those that grow through this type of trauma. And it's probably, each situation is going to be very unique. But that's what I went through, which when I look back, I find it very difficult to understand the way people saw it and dealt with some of their pain.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's interesting that you say that, because I suppose in a way it is a sort of repressed, in a way, like the way that our brain processes things. You want to repress certain things, you want to push certain things down, or you want to highlight certain other areas in a way to protect yourself, or to rather just find the answers to things, right? And so doing that, even other people, the way they saw it could have been somewhat skewed because they are also trying to make sense of what had happened. But this is sort of why it's important that everyone has a space to share that. Was there ever any point where, all of you that were in the room at the time sat down together with a therapist or with a teacher to talk about what had happened as a group?
Yeah, absolutely. So the day that I came back on that Monday, I believe that was the first day the school was back and open up. And maybe it was a Tuesday. I can't remember. Whatever the first day was when they opened the school back up and we came back. I walked into that room and we had a counselor there. And we were sitting there and people were crying and people were upset and people were very, very mad at me for, saying anything. And I couldn't comprehend it. And I got up and I walked out and I never went back I went back to that classroom probably 25 years later. I went back to the school, but I got removed from that class immediately because I didn't understand it. At that time, so I was the one who got shot and I didn't recognize what they had seen. And that took me some time to mature and understand their trauma. But yeah, people were upset.
What were some of the things that people were saying, though, like that?
Yeah, so I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember exact quotes, but it was to the effect of, why didn't you just keep your mouth shut? This never would have happened to you if you didn't push it. This is the attention you wanted. You got what you wanted. Our friend wouldn't have gotten arrested if you just would have been quiet. So there were a lot of emotions on different sides. And like I said, my heart goes out to when I think of a 15, 16, 17-year-old child having to see somebody else get shot, it's an horrific event. And so I now understand their perspective, but I didn't at the time.
Yeah, I can imagine that also being really, really hard to wrap your head around because, you had just gone through something physically, emotionally so traumatic. And then on top of that, to come back into that same environment around the same people and then to have that kind of a response. And there'd be almost sympathy towards the shooter as opposed to you. Yeah, just being really hard to grasp.
Yeah, a lot of different emotions. Emotionally, I would say it started taking some time before that started to settle in what had happened, the trauma that had happened, and then it was a few really difficult years.
What happened to the shooter post this incident?
Yeah, so he ended up going in, we call it, I think it's California Youth Authority. It's juvenile jail. I think it was 8 or 9 years. And then he got out. And from all accounts that I know, he's living a productive life. And I hope he's doing really well.
When you found out that he had been given 8 years, what were your thoughts?
That's a great question. I don't remember. I don't know that I was mature enough to understand or put much thought into it, to be honest.
Yeah, I would imagine like there'd just be like just a flood of thoughts in a sense like, okay, I'm getting the justice maybe that I need or I deserve, while at the same time it's, was this a mistake? Hearing everyone else's input as well, like, was this on me? Was this on him? Was this a sentencing fair? Was it enough? Was it long enough? Is he going to learn from this? Is he going to repent what he did in a sense, right?
Yeah, I also, when you look back, and I don't know how long it took before he was sentenced, so maybe it was another year or two, comprehending at that 16 years old what 8 or 9 years means compared to when you're, 30, 40, 50 and have a perspective on length of time. I can't remember how I reacted or what my emotions were.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the therapy that you went through? You said you did go through therapy. You were diagnosed with PTSD as well. Can you walk us through what was some of the things, the most significant memories during your therapy and treatment?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the beginning, there was no need for therapy, right? So my father, today he's 79. He was a police officer and he had for lack of a better term, he had an old school mentality where, you rub some dirt on it. You don't necessarily talk about your emotions and you tough things out. So there was a lot of that growing up, and there's a lot to be said for that mentality and the strength that it's given me. And there's also a lot to say on the perspective of the other side of that and being more emotionally engaged and things of that nature. So to be fair, it was just a different generation. We didn't go to therapy right away. It wasn't until I started experiencing the post-traumatic stress disorder, which where my parents coming in and they were waking me up because I was either screaming or I was yelling and I was having nightmares. And these are common of post-traumatic stress disorder. This wasn't talked about very much 30 years ago. And if it was more associated with veterans or wartime events, not from what I knew, it wasn't associated with this type of trauma. And so my parents didn't know, they weren't equipped to deal with that. And at first there wasn't therapy until my mom said, "Hey, we're going to go see a therapist." And so we started going to a therapist. I don't remember a lot of the specifics. I remember having conversations with it. And it wasn't until I was 18 and deciding to go into the military, I ended up going into the Marine Corps. Part of that, I needed to deal with being around weapons and guns, and my dad taking me to the range and say, "We're going to get past this fear of yours," and put a gun in my hand. And I went to the range and I shot, and I was able to work my way through some of that. That doesn't clear up your post-traumatic stress disorder. And so there's situations and there's times and there are areas that I can't explain why it pops up where I get anxiety, but I know how to cope with it. And I know how to understand what those triggers are and say, I'm in a safe situation. This is just me reacting to something that happened to me years ago, and move past it.
Yeah, I mean, holding that gun for the first time, in a way, did you feel like that was somewhat empowering, you being on the other end of that gun? Even though, of course, it was just for training purposes, but did that sort of shift in perspective help a little?
I don't know that it was empowering. It was frightening. I can remember that day. And it was actually the first time I ever fired a weapon, even though I grew up with those weapons. My father was we didn't go to the range and shoot. It wasn't something we did for sport growing up. So that was the first time being on the other end of it after being shot. I had seen the weapons, been told, to respect and give them their due respect. But I don't remember feeling empowered, just more scared of that day. And it helped. It didn't cure the PTSD, but it helped.
Do you still live with some of the symptoms of the PTSD?
Yeah, I do. So it's not as intense, but I've probably been to one movie in 10 or 15 years. So I recognize that when I walk into that theater type room, I have to rationalize that I'm safe and that nothing is going to happen. But with that being said, there's one way in and there's one way out of the movies in the US, which is through the doors coming in, which is very similar to the situation I was in. So it's just not worth it to me. And so if I find myself in that type of environment, that type of room, I can get through it. It's just not a comfortable situation. And then I'm sure there's lingering effects. I'm not educated on PTSD and all of the different pieces of it, but it's not something that stands out in my life as something I have to deal with on a regular basis.
Yeah. What did the school do after this? I know you mentioned that there was a school counselor that was a little bit more involved. What kind of processes did they put on a larger scale to make sure that this kind of event doesn't happen again?
So I don't know the specifics of what they put in place. I do know that all of the schools in the US, because of these tragedies, have put processes and protocols in place as far as the way the staff and the administration and the teachers are to handle it. And I'm sure there's a lot that goes on in the background that's not shared with the public. But I just don't know the specifics of what actions they took. I'm quite sure that they took quite a bit. I just don't know them.
You did mention, though, like nowadays in schools, they do have, like, in general in the US, they do have certain kinds of training and protocols in place to make sure that students are aware as to, I guess they have like drills, or, like over here we have fire drills, fire safety drills. And that's like a mandate for all schools that every student has to go through. Earthquake drills sometimes is a common thing too. Do they have like particular drills for these kind of situations?
So they do. And it's going to depend on, that school district or where you're at in what community, whether they're doing it with the students or whether they're doing it with the staff only. I would imagine that they're not sharing all of the details with the overall student body because they want to make sure that they're protected. But the conversation is prevalent now. It's something that happens, unfortunately, on way too much. It's sad that we have to have conversations about school shooting drills versus earthquake drills, which is what I grew up with. And my incident happened 32 years ago, and we haven't solved for it. So it's sad to have this conversation.
Yeah. You would think, if it's not up to one school or two school or a couple of incidents like this to change the entire like laws around gun usage and gun ownage, possession in the US, but at the very least, they would regulate it a little bit more or tighten the rules around that. So, even purchasing a gun would be a lot harder than, it used to be back then, just because of the fact that there's been so many incidents.
Yeah, there's been a lot of different laws that have been put in place. So, my opinion on it is I support responsible gun ownership. I'm not an expert in the law. The only opinion that I'll say around, gun safety, gun control, and things of that nature is that there are evil people in this world, and you can put as many laws as you want in place. And if there's laws that save one life, I support that happening, but also have to recognize that someone who's going to go through this isn't going to pay attention to the laws that are on the books. And so I think it goes deeper in trying to solve for this. I don't have the answer, but I don't believe that you can solve this with just one law. I think it's a multi-level plan that needs to be put in place on how we impact our society as a whole. It's very, very challenging. It's also a very, very delicate conversation when you get into gun control, gun ownership in the United States.
Yeah, especially because, like, in a sense, it's like once it is sort of legalized, then in a way people feel like it's important to own one to protect oneself. However, on the other side, it's using violence to protect yourself. So it's like, if only it just didn't exist at all, then that would just not be a form of violence that even could happen in society, right? So like here in Asia, like there's no such thing as owning or buying guns. Like the only people that own guns here are like police officers or those in the army and military. So that's just not even a matter of like concern in terms of public safety.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you think about different societies and cultures, and it's our Second Amendment right in the U.S. and very passionate about our rights. People are very, very passionate about that. And when you talk about other cultures, to your point, it's not even thought of. But here, it's very ingrained in our society.
Yeah. And especially for you, I mean, you've kind of come from a background where, your family, your dad is in the police force. So having a gun was absolutely essential and important, but also gun safety was something that must have been very securely talked about and put into place, like proper processes. Like I'm sure if your dad had guns at home, they were kept in safe places. You were all informed, that you cannot access that, until you've gone through proper training. So in a way, it was introduced to you in a very safe respect and manner. However, you of all students had to experience it on the absolute other end of it in a very, very unsafe sort of situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're spot on. My father was a responsible gun owner. Individual who shot me, if his stepfather was, I would assume he was a responsible gun owner, but the gun came from his stepfather. So on the very other spectrum of that, we have somebody who got access to a gun that he didn't have to purchase and, used it in a violent way. So it's a very, very difficult conversation and very nuanced to try and figure out how we solve for this violence.
Yeah. Do you keep a gun at home?
So I have in the past, I have over the years. I'm certainly not opposed to it, depending on whether I use it for sport or for protection. I have, yes.
Okay. So in a sense, despite all of that happened, your personal views is that it is still kind of important to keep one for safety and protection.
I think it's up to the individual. So you have some individuals, there's a variety of reasons why people have weapons, whether it's for sport or it's for protection. I spent 4 years in the United States Marine Corps. I was around weapons a lot. Going through that experience, I'm comfortable with them. So I think there's a variety of reasons why people would have a weapon.
Yeah, interesting. If faced with a similar situation, what sort of advice would you give to our listeners? And again, this doesn't have to be necessarily in a school. It can be in a convenience store, in a bank. What would you suggest to listeners? What would you tell listeners to do if they're in a situation similar to this?
Oh, wow. That's a question I don't remember ever being asked, and I don't want to give the wrong answer because I don't want anybody to get hurt by my opinion or make a decision based on my opinion. But I would say comply, be quiet, and try to go unnoticed.
Yeah, interesting. So what a lot of other people were saying to you, in a sense, that you should have perhaps not said anything in that moment or in that situation, a part of that you do agree with?
Yeah, absolutely. The question about regret, yeah, of course, with hindsight, there was no reason for me to say anything or speak out that day. And if I put in a similar situation, I wouldn't. I would sit back and I would try to blend in and I would keep my mouth shut.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to end this with one last question. Can you tell us a little bit about you now? What do you do now? Are you happy with where you are right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm incredibly happy where I'm at now. I've been married I'm coming up on my 25th year wedding anniversary. I have 3 grown children, 29, 25, and 21. I have 2 grandbabies. So I have a wonderful family life. I work in the U.S. in the insurance business. I manage, sales and operations team, very well adjusted. That day that happened, like we've talked previously, it doesn't define who I am. It was a moment in time. And so I can only speak for myself, but if I was going to give people advice, going through trauma, one, they're going to have to go through that, work through their counseling or however they work through the trauma. But to the best of my ability, I've tried not to let that one moment define who I am for my entire life. Now, we're talking today because it did happen to me. And if there's a way that my story can reach other people and I can help them, I'm at a point in my life where I'm incredibly comfortable to do that. And if somebody went through a mass shooting or they have a family member that did, I have perspective. I've gone through this journey and there's ups and downs and there's a lot of challenges. And I'm more than happy to have a conversation and help as many people as I can.
Yeah. I'll definitely put in some of your contact details as well, maybe in the description as well. So if anyone would like to reach out to you, that they can find you to share some of their experiences as well regarding this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for, sharing that story and being vulnerable with us today. I can't imagine it, being easy sort of reliving that, even though it can be at quite a far away distance, but to have to relive some of those memories, it can always be really difficult. So I really appreciate you sharing that today.
Yeah, I appreciate the forum. And like I said, I hope that through your listeners and through the listeners that I work with and the story getting out, that this helps. If it helps one person, it's worth having the conversation.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Anthony, for today. I really, really appreciate it.
hopefully this helps some people, but it's been very good. So I appreciate it very much.
If you enjoyed the episode and would like to help support the show, please follow and subscribe. You can rate and review your feedback on any of our platforms listed in the description. I'd like to recognize our guests who are vulnerable and open to share their life experiences with us. Thank you for showing us we're human. Also, a thank you to our team who worked so hard behind the scenes to make it happen.
Joe Mills,
Chris Trzynski, Stefan Menzel.
The show would be nothing without you. I'm Jennica, host and writer of the show, and you're listening to Multispective.